The space station floated in the darkness between three distant stars. It was called Helix 9, and it was the largest military academy in the known galaxy. Ships from dozens of worlds came and went every day. Species that had traveled among the stars for thousands of years sent their best young officers here to learn the art of war. Park stood at the window of her small room and watched a battleship drift past. The ship was massive, covered in dark scales that looked like the skin of its reptilian builders. She had read about them in her studies back on Earth. They were proud warriors who had never lost a war in 4,000 years. Their empire stretched across 200 star systems. And tomorrow, she would sit in a classroom with them. Was 23 years old. She had short black hair and calm eyes that rarely showed what she was thinking. Back on Earth, she had graduated at the top of her class at the Korean Aerospace Academy. Her professors had called her a genius. Her father, Admiral Park, had called her stubborn. She preferred stubborn. The door behind her made a soft sound. A message appeared on the screen beside it, her schedule for tomorrow. Combat Theory, Room 7A, Commander. She had heard stories about Commander. He was over 200 years old and he had been teaching at the academy for 6 decades. He was famous for 2 things. First, his tactical knowledge was unmatched. Second, he hated humans. Read the message twice, then turned back to the window. The battleship was gone now, replaced by empty space and distant lights. She thought about her father's words before she left Earth. They had stood together at the launch platform, watching her transport ship being prepared. He had not hugged her. That was not his way. Instead, he had put his hand on her shoulder and spoken quietly. "They will test you," he had said. "Every species out there thinks we are children. They think we are weak because we only reached the stars 40 years ago. They will try to break you. Do not give them the reaction they want." "What reaction should I give them?" she had asked. Her father had smiled just a little, the one they least expect. Now, standing in her room on a space station light years from home, wondered what that meant. She was the only human in the entire academy. Earth had been allowed to send just one representative, and the selection process had taken 2 years. Thousands had applied. She had been chosen. She did not intend to fail. The next morning walked through the curved hallways of the academy. Other cadets passed her, and she felt their eyes on her skin. A group of clicked their mandibles as she went by. They were insect-like creatures, tall and thin, with 4 arms and compound eyes that saw in every direction. One of them said something in their language, and the others made sounds that might have been laughter. Kept walking. Room 7A was large, with seats arranged in a half-circle facing a raised platform. 40 cadets were already inside. Saw the water-filled helmets of the aquatic and the glowing crystalline bodies of the. Every species in the room had been traveling among stars while humans were still living in caves. She found an empty seat near the back and sat down. A few minutes later, Commander entered. He was tall even for a. His scales were dark green, almost black, and his yellow eyes swept across the room like searchlights. He wore the formal uniform of the academy, but beneath it could see the scars of old battles. This was not a creature who taught from books. He had lived what he taught. His eyes found her almost immediately. "Ah," he said, and his voice was deep and cold. "The human." The room went quiet. Walked to the front of the platform and pressed a button. The wall behind him lit up with images, flags, dozens of them, the symbols of every species represented in his classroom. "Before we begin," said, "let us remind ourselves of who we are. These flags represent civilizations that have shaped the galaxy. The Dominion, 4,000 years of military supremacy. The Hive Collective, masters of coordinated warfare. The Deep Union, naval strategies that conquered entire oceans before moving to space." He went through each flag, speaking of conquests and victories, of empires built and enemies destroyed. The cadets sat as their species were mentioned. Pride filled the room like a physical thing. Then reached the last flag. Earth, a simple image of a blue planet on a black background. He stopped and looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned to face the class. Humans, he said, a species that joined spacefaring civilizations only 40 years ago. Before that, they spent most of their history killing each other over pieces of their single planet. They have no empire. They have conquered nothing. Their bodies are fragile. They are laughably short. They have contributed nothing of value to galactic civilization. Felt 40 pairs of eyes turned toward her. She kept her face calm. Her hands remained folded on her desk. Her breathing did not change. Seemed disappointed by her lack of reaction. "Tell me, human," he said, "why are you here?" "To learn," Commander replied. Her voice was steady. "To learn," repeated. "And what could you possibly learn that would matter? Your species will be extinct or enslaved within a few centuries. That is the fate of the weak." Some of the cadets made sounds of agreement. Others just watched, curious to see what the human would do. Looked directly at. "With respect, Commander, I do not believe the future is written yet." For a moment, something flickered in his yellow eyes. Then he turned away and began his lecture. For the next 3 weeks, sat in that classroom and listened. Was brilliant. She could not deny that. His understanding of military strategy was deep and vast. He could explain battles that had happened 10,000 years ago as if he had been there himself. But he never missed a chance to insult humanity. When he discussed failed military campaigns, he used human history as examples. The pointless trench warfare of World War I, the strategic disasters of Vietnam, the nuclear bombs dropped on civilian cities. Every time he would look at as he spoke, waiting for her to argue, to cry, to prove that humans were as emotional and weak as he believed. Every time she simply took notes. At night, she would return to her room and study. She read everything she could find about military tactics. She analyzed their victories and their rare defeats. She watched recordings of war games from previous academy years. And she began to see patterns. They were powerful. Their strategies were proven over thousands of years, but that was also their weakness. They had not changed. They did not need to change because they always won. Their tactics were predictable if you knew what to look for. Made notes. She drew diagrams. She ran simulations on her personal computer. And she waited. One night she called her brother on Earth. The signal took time to travel across the light years, but eventually his face appeared on her screen. Was 3 years younger than her, still studying engineering at their father's old university. He had her eyes but their mother's smile. "How is the great Galactic Academy?" he asked. "Challenging," she said. "Are they treating you well?" Thought about constant insults, about the laughter of other cadets, about eating alone every day because no one wanted to sit with the human. "Well enough," she said. Knew her too well to believe that, but he also knew she would not want him to worry. "Father asks about you," he said. "Tell him I am learning." "Learning what?" Looked at the diagram spread across her desk, patterns of warfare, weaknesses hidden in plain sight. "Patience," she said. "I am learning patience." She did not know that her patience would soon be tested in ways she had never imagined. She did not know that Commander was planning something that would push her to her breaking point. But she also did not know that her breaking point was much further away than anyone believed. The morning began like any other. Woke early, exercised in her small room, and ate breakfast alone in the corner of the academy cafeteria. The other cadets talked and laughed around her, but no one approached her table. She had grown used to the silence. She did not mind it anymore. When she arrived at room 7A, she noticed something different. The other cadets were whispering to each other, glancing at her, then looking away quickly. There was an energy in the room that had not been there before. Excitement, perhaps, or anticipation. Something was going to happen. Took her usual seat and waited. Commander entered the room carrying something in his hands. It took her a moment to recognize it. The flag of Earth. The blue marble on black background. It was smaller than she remembered, maybe a meter square, made of some synthetic fabric that caught the light. He walked to the platform and held the flag up for everyone to see. Today, announced, we will discuss psychological warfare. Felt her heart beat a little faster, but her face showed nothing. Set the flag on the table beside him and produced a small device from his uniform, a plasma torch, the same tool used to cut through starship hulls. In his massive scaled hand, it looked like a toy. Before any battle begins, he continued, there is a war of the mind. The strongest warrior can be defeated if his spirit is broken first. History is full of examples, armies that surrendered without fighting, civilizations that collapsed from within. The body follows the mind. Break the mind and the body will fall. He ignited the plasma torch. Blue flame hissed from its tip. Symbols are important to primitive species. They cling to pieces of cloth and metal as if these objects hold real power. They believe that their flags represent something greater than themselves. This belief is a weakness. He picked up the Earth flag with his free hand. Let us observe how this works in practice. Understood what was about to happen. She had 3 seconds to decide how to react. She could stand up and demand he stop. She could report him to the Academy administration. She could let her anger show, prove that he was right about human emotions. Or she could do what her father had taught her. Give them the reaction they least expect. She chose. Touched the plasma torch to the flag. The fabric caught fire immediately. Blue and white flames crawled across the image of Earth, eating it piece by piece. The material curled and blackened. Smoke rose toward the ceiling. 40 pairs of alien eyes turned to look at. She sat completely still. Her hands remained folded on her desk. Her breathing was slow and steady. Her face showed nothing at all, not anger, not sadness, not even surprise. She smiled. The smile confused everyone. His hand paused for a moment, the burning flag still clutched in his grip. He had expected tears. He had expected rage. He had expected the human to break. He had not expected this. The flag finished burning, dropped the ashes onto the floor and deactivated his torch. His yellow eyes fixed on with something new in them. Curiosity, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. The human shows no reaction, he said to the class. Interesting. Perhaps she is more broken than I thought, or perhaps she simply does not care about her own people. Raised her hand. Scales rippled. You wish to speak. I wish to respond to your demonstration, Commander, if I may. A murmur went through the classroom. No cadet had ever asked to respond to lessons. They stared at her for a long moment, then gestured toward the platform. By all means, come, teach us something about humans. Stood and walked to the front of the room. She could feel the attention of every cadet, every alien mind focused on her small human body. She stopped beside the pile of ashes that had been her flag and looked at them for a moment. Then she bent down and picked up a handful. Commander, she said, letting the ashes fall through her fingers, you wanted to teach us about psychological warfare. You wanted to show how destroying a symbol can break the enemy's spirit. Thank you for the lesson. She dusted off her hands. But you made a mistake. You assumed that humans worship their symbols the same way other species do. We do not. Crossed his arms. His face was unreadable. Explain. Turned to face the class. On Earth, our flags have been burned many times, in wars, in protests, in acts of hatred. Every generation has seen it happen, and every generation has responded the same way. We do not weep over ashes. We build new flags. We create new symbols. We keep moving forward. She paused, making sure everyone was listening. They have carried the same banner for 4,000 years. They have never changed their hive symbols. They still use flags designed when they first left their oceans. Your symbols are ancient and unchanging because your civilizations are ancient and unchanging. Some of the cadets shifted uncomfortably, continued. Humans are different. We have existed for only a fraction of the time you have. But in that time, we have changed more than any of you. Our nations have risen and fallen. Our flags have been created and destroyed and created again. We do not cling to symbols because we know that symbols are not what make us strong. She pointed at the ashes on the floor. You burned a piece of cloth. You did not burn a single human. You did not destroy a single human idea. You did not weaken a single human heart. All you did was create smoke. The room was completely silent. Unfolded his arms. For the first time since had met him, he looked uncertain. Pretty words, he said finally. Humans are good at those, but words have won none of your wars. Your species talks about change and adaptation, but when tested in real combat, you fail. Every time. Do we? Something in his voice made eyes narrow. You have something to say, human. Felt her heart beating hard in her chest, but her voice remained calm. I would like to propose something, Commander, a practical demonstration. You say human strategy is weak. You say we cannot win real battles. Let us test that. The class went very quiet. What are you suggesting? Asked. A war game. Your best student against me. Standard academy simulation. Equal resources, equal starting positions. Let us see if human tactics are truly as worthless as you claim. A massive shape rose from the front row. Cadet. He was young for a maybe 80 years old, but already larger than most of his species. He was personal student, the most promising tactical mind to enter the academy in a century. In 4 years, he had never lost a single simulation. I accept, growled. His voice was like stones grinding together. It will be educational for you. Looked at him. He was twice her height and probably 5 times her weight. His scales were thick enough to stop bullets. His people had conquered worlds before humans had invented writing. She was not afraid. Tomorrow then, she said. His mouth twisted into something that might have been a smile. Tomorrow, 800 hours, the main simulation chamber. The entire academy will be welcome to watch. Good, said. I want witnesses. She walked back to her seat. The other cadets stared at her as she passed. Some looked confused. Some looked amused. None of them believed she had any chance of winning. That was fine. She did not need them to believe. That night did not sleep. She sat in her room surrounded by data screens, analyzing every war game had ever fought. She studied his patterns, his habits, his decision-making process. She looked for the same weaknesses she had found in tactics. And she found them. Near midnight, she called her brother again. Answered looking half asleep, but when she told him what had happened, he became very awake. He burned our flags, said, in front of everyone. Yes. What are you going to do? Looked at the data on her screens. Victories, his strategies, his weaknesses. I am going to show them what humans are really made of. Her brother's voice was worried. Be careful. These are not humans you are dealing with. They do not think like us. They do not fight like us. I know, she said. That is exactly why I am going to win. Was silent for a moment. Then he smiled just like their father. Make them remember your name. I intend to. She ended the call and turned back to her work. Tomorrow would be the most important day of her life. Tomorrow, she would either prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars, or she would confirm every insult had ever spoken. She refused to lose. Outside her window, the stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere among them was Earth, her home, the small blue planet that had produced a species stubborn enough to reach for the impossible. She thought about the ashes on the classroom floor, the burned flag that thought would break her. He did not understand. He could not understand. They had known only victory for 4,000 years. They had never learned what humans learned in every generation. How to rise from ashes. How to turn defeat into strength. How to keep fighting when everyone expected you to fall. Returned to her screens and continued her work. She would not sleep tonight. She did not need sleep. She needed a plan. And by morning she had one. The simulation chamber was the largest room in the academy. It could hold 500 beings comfortably, with seats arranged in rising circles around a central arena. Two control stations faced each other across the floor, each surrounded by holographic displays that would show the battle as it unfolded. By 7:30, every seat was filled. Word had spread through the station like fire. The human cadet had challenged the undefeated. The weak, fragile human who had watched her flag burn without crying was going to fight against 4,000 years of military tradition. No one wanted to miss it. Most came to watch her fail. Some came out of curiosity. A few came because they had seen something in her eyes during that classroom moment, something that made them wonder if the human knew something they did not. In the observation deck above the chamber, Admiral sat in the place reserved for Earth's representative. She was 60 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen more battles than most of the aliens around her. She had fought her way up through Earth's military ranks, then spent 20 years fighting political battles to reach this position in the galactic community. She had met Park once briefly, before the young woman had been sent to the academy. She remembered thinking that there was steel in those calm eyes. Today, she would find out if she had been right. Below, the crowd parted as entered the chamber. He was massive even by standards, his dark green scales gleaming under the lights. He walked with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. Behind him came Commander and a group of officers, all wearing expressions of barely hidden satisfaction. Took his place at one control station. He did not look at the crowd. He did not need their approval. He knew he would win. It was simply a matter of how quickly. Minutes passed. The crowd grew restless. Then entered. She was so small compared to everyone else in the room. A tiny figure in the standard cadet uniform, walking alone through a sea of giants. She did not look at the crowds either. Her eyes were fixed on the control station across from, on the holographic displays that waited for her commands. She took her place and began checking her equipment. An official stepped forward to explain the rules. Standard fleet simulation. Each commander would control identical forces, 50 warships of various classes, from small fighters to heavy battleships. They would start on opposite sides of a simulated star system. The goal was simple: destroy the enemy fleet or force their surrender. No time limit, no restrictions on tactics. The battle would continue until one side was completely defeated. Listen to the rules without expression. She had studied them carefully. She knew every detail of how the simulation worked, every strength and weakness of the virtual ships she would command. More importantly, she knew. She had spent all night watching recordings of his previous battles, 47 victories without a single loss. He fought the same way every time: aggressive, direct, overwhelming. He would gather his forces into a single powerful formation and crush his enemies through superior firepower and positioning. It was the way. It had worked for 4,000 years. Was counting on that. The official finished speaking and stepped back. A countdown appeared on the main display, 10 seconds until the simulation began. Spoke for the first time, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Human, you should surrender now. Save yourself the embarrassment." Did not look at him. Her hands moved across her controls, preparing her initial orders. "Thank you for your concern," she said. "I will take my chances." 5 seconds. His voice came from the observation area. "Begin." The holographic display exploded into life. A star system appeared between the two stations, rendered in perfect detail. Planets, moons, asteroid fields, the golden sun at the center. Blue markers showed fleet. Red markers showed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then made his first move. His fleet began gathering at a central point, forming the classic battle formation. A sphere of smaller ships protecting a core of heavy battleships. It was perfect. Textbook. Exactly what it expected. Her fleet moved too. But instead of forming up to meet him, her ships scattered. They spread across the star system, hiding behind planets, disappearing into asteroid fields, breaking into small groups of 2 or 3 ships each. Murmurs ran through the crowd. "She is running," someone said. "She is afraid." Scales rippled with satisfaction. Cowardice. The human knows she cannot win in direct combat. Up in the observation deck, Admiral said nothing, but she leaned forward slightly, her eyes tracking the movement of scattered fleet. The first hour passed. Pursued, his fleet moved through the system like a predator hunting prey, searching for scattered ships. When he found them, the results were predictable. 3 battleships against a pair of human destroyers. The outcome was never in doubt. But every time engaged, ships retreated. They fired a few shots, drew his forces in a particular direction, then fled before they could be destroyed. He caught a few of them, destroying maybe 10 ships in that first hour, but his fleet was spreading out now, chasing targets across the entire system. The second hour was worse. Sacrificed outposts and resource stations. She let claim victory after victory. On the scoreboard, she was losing badly. Her fleet was down to 40 ships. His was still at 48. The crowd began to lose interest. This was not a battle. This was an execution in slow motion. Turned to address the observers. This is why humans cannot compete with true warriors. They have no courage. They have no honor. They run and hide and lose slowly instead of fighting and losing quickly. Some laughed, others nodded in agreement. But Admiral noticed something. She had been watching the movement of ships very carefully. They were not running randomly. There was a pattern. Every retreat pulled fleet in a specific direction. Every sacrifice happened at a specific location. The old admiral's eyes widened. She understood. The third hour began, and frustration was starting to show. He had won every engagement, but the human fleet refused to die properly. Her ships kept appearing and disappearing, striking at the edges of his formation, then vanishing before he could respond. His fleet was scattered now. His careful sphere formation had broken apart during the chase. His battleships were separated from their escorts. His supply lines were stretched thin. And still the human ran. "Enough games," growled. He gathered what forces he could and launched a direct attack on its largest remaining group, a cluster of 15 ships hiding in an asteroid field. His forces closed in from 3 directions. Victory was certain. Then's fleet moved. Not the ships in the asteroid field. All of them. Every scattered group, every hidden destroyer, every fighter that had been waiting in the shadows for 3 hours. They emerged from behind planets and moons, from within asteroid fields, from the blind spots created by its own aggressive pursuit. They were everywhere. And they were all converging on the same point. Understood too late, his divided fleet spread across the entire star system could not reunite in time. His battleships were surrounded. His escorts were out of position. His supply ships were undefended. The human had not been running, she had been hurting. Every retreat had been calculated. Every sacrifice had been bait. For 3 hours, she had been studying his reactions, predicting his moves, leading him exactly where she wanted him to go. Now the trap closed. In the observation deck, Admiral began to smile. His counterattack lasted 11 minutes. Her small ships swarmed scattered battleships, striking weak points she had identified during her long night of study. Her destroyers cut his supply lines. Her fighters prevented his forces from regrouping. The red markers on the display began to disappear, one by one at first, then in groups, then in floods. Fought back. He was still a brilliant tactician, still commanding the finest warships in the simulation. But he was playing his game now, and she knew the rules better than he did. When the last red marker vanished from the display, the chamber fell completely silent. Stood at her control station, her face calm, her hands steady. She did not celebrate. She did not smile. She simply looked at the empty space where his fleet had been and waited. The silence stretched on. Then slowly, Admiral began to clap. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder, one pair of hands applauding in a room full of shocked aliens. Then another sound joined it, and another, the clicking their mandibles in respect, the bubbling in their helmets, even some of the younger too impressed to remember they should be angry. Stared at his displays in disbelief. His hands were shaking. Scales had gone pale. He looked at the human cadet as if seeing her for the first time. Finally allowed herself to smile. The battle was over. But the real victory was just beginning. The applause faded slowly, like waves retreating from a shore. The beings in the chamber did not know how to react. They had come to watch a slaughter and they had seen one, just not the slaughter they expected. Remained frozen at his control station. His massive clawed hands still hovered over displays that showed nothing but empty space. His fleet was gone. 4 years of perfect victories, destroyed in 11 minutes by a creature half his size who should not have been able to beat him. His mind could not accept it. Stepped away from her station and walked to the center of the arena. The holographic display still showed the star system, now scattered with the wreckage of simulated ships. Blue markers among the debris. Her fleet had taken losses too, maybe 15 ships in that final assault. But she had won. She had won. Commander descended from the observation area. His movements were stiff, his scales still pale with shock. He stopped in front of and looked down at her, his yellow eyes searching her face for some explanation. "How?" he asked. His voice was quiet, meant only for her. "Patience," she said, "and observation. You taught me that psychological warfare begins before the battle. You just did not realize I was paying attention." His jaw tightened. "You let him chase you for 3 hours. You sacrificed ships, resources, positions. Any commander would have attacked long before you did. Our doctrine does not permit such waiting." "I know," said. "That is why it worked." She turned to face the crowd. Hundreds of alien eyes stared back at her, some hostile, some confused, some, she thought, almost impressed. "Commander wanted to teach me about psychological warfare," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber. "He burned my flag to break my spirit. Instead, he taught me something valuable. He showed me how much to rely on tradition, on doing things the way they have always been done." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Is an excellent tactician. His formation was perfect. His responses were textbook. He did everything right according to 4,000 years of military doctrine, and that is exactly why he lost." Looked up at her words. His eyes were dark with humiliation, but there was something else there too. A question, a need to understand. "You predicted every move I would make," he said. It was not an accusation, it was almost a plea. "Yes," admitted. "You follow patterns, all do. Your tactics have not changed because they have always worked. But patterns can be learned. Patterns can be exploited. Patterns are weakness." She walked toward him slowly. The crowd watched in silence. "Humans do not have 4,000 years of military tradition. We do not have doctrine that has won 100 wars. Every generation, we face new enemies, new challenges, new situations. We cannot rely on what worked before. We must adapt. We must change. We must think in ways our enemies do not expect." She stopped in front of. Despite her small size, she met his eyes without fear. "That is what you saw today, not cowardice, adaptation." Admiral descended from the observation deck. The crowd parted for her like water around a stone. She was older than most of the beings in the room, but she walked with the confidence of someone who had earned every gray hair through combat and sacrifice. She stopped beside and looked at. "Commander," she said, "the Academy Board will be reviewing your curriculum. We have received complaints about the treatment of certain species in your classroom: burning flags, public humiliation, systematic discrimination." Scales flushed dark. "Admiral, Save it." His voice was cold. "I have been stationed on this space station for 15 years. I have watched you break cadets from a dozen species, not because they were weak, but because they were different. That ends today." She turned to Cadet Park. "Your tactical analysis of patterns will be added to Earth Fleet's strategic database." "Well done." Straightened. "Thank you, Admiral." Nodded and walked away. The crowd began to disperse, speaking in quiet voices. What they had witnessed would be discussed for years. The day a human defeated the undefeated. The day someone finally proved that the old ways were not the only ways. Started to leave, but's voice stopped her. "Wait." She turned. The Massive was still standing at his control station, but his posture had changed. The arrogance was gone. In its place was something had not expected: humility. "You said that patterns are weakness," said slowly. "But I have trained my entire life to perfect these patterns. My father trained me. His father trained him. This is what are." Considered her response carefully. She could gloat. She could enjoy his suffering. It would feel good after weeks of enduring insults and the Academy's contempt. But that was not why she had come to the stars. "Patterns are tools," she said. "They become weakness only when you cannot see beyond them. The formation is powerful. Your tactics are proven. But they work best when combined with flexibility, with the ability to change when the situation demands." Was silent for a long moment. "Can this be learned?" "Yes." "Will you teach me?" The question surprised her. A few hours ago, this creature had expected to crush her without effort. Now he was asking her to be his teacher. She thought about what that meant, about what it could mean for humanity's place in the galaxy. They were proud, but they were not stupid. If could learn, others could learn. And if they learned from humans, they might begin to see humanity differently. Not as weak children who had arrived too late to matter, but as something new, something valuable. "Come to my quarters tomorrow evening," she said. "We will start with something humans call thinking outside the box." Tilted his head. "What is a box?" Despite everything, smiled. "I will explain." She left the chamber and walked alone through the curved hallways of the Academy. Other cadets passed her, and this time their looks were different. Not contempt, not dismissal, curiosity, perhaps even respect. One stopped her in the corridor. It was one of the insects who had laughed at her on her first day. "Human," it said, its mandibles clicking uncertainly. "How did you know that would fall into your trap?" Thought about the question. "I watched," she said. "For 3 weeks I watched Commander and his students. I learned their patterns, their assumptions, their blind spots, and I used that knowledge against them." "But why?" they asked. "Why not simply reports behavior? Why challenge directly?" "Because reports can be ignored, victories cannot." She continued walking, leaving them to consider her words. That night she called her family on Earth. Her father answered first, his face appearing on the screen with its usual stern expression. But there was something else in his eyes, something warm. "I heard," he said. "Word travels fast, even across light years." "Are you proud?" she asked. Admiral Park considered the question seriously. "Pride is dangerous. It makes us overconfident. It makes us stop learning." "That is not an answer." Her father smiled. It was a rare sight, and it made his heart ache with homesickness. "Yes," he said, "I am proud. You showed them what humans are capable of, but more importantly, you showed them with grace. You did not humiliate when you could have. You offered to teach him instead. That took courage of a different kind. Appeared beside their father, pushing into the camera's view. I told everyone I know. My sister beat an undefeated alien warrior. They did not believe me until they saw the footage. There is footage. It is all over the galactic network. You are famous. She had not considered that. The thought of millions of beings watching her victory made her uncomfortable. Fame was not why she had done this. I just wanted to prove we belong here, she said quietly, that humans have something to offer. Her father nodded. You have done more than that. You have given them something they did not know they needed, a new way of thinking. In the long run, that matters more than any single victory. They talked for another hour about small things and large things, about home and family, and the strange turns life could take. When the call ended, sat alone in her room and looked out at the stars. She thought about whose career would never recover from today. She thought about who had lost for the first time in his life and chosen to learn instead of hate. She thought about the other cadets who would look at her differently now. And she thought about Earth, that small blue marble spinning around an ordinary star, the home of a species that had reached for the stars only 40 years ago and refused to be told they did not belong. Tomorrow she would begin teaching. The day after, others might ask for lessons. In time, human tactical thinking might spread through the academy, through the galaxy. Change was coming, and Park would be part of it. She allowed herself to feel proud, just for a moment. Then she opened her study materials and began preparing for tomorrow's classes. There was still much to learn. 3 months passed on Station Helix 9. The seasons did not change in space, but the academy changed around Park. It happened slowly at first, then faster, like a stone rolling downhill. The day after her victory, one cadet asked if she could explain her tactics. Within a week, she was holding informal study sessions in her quarters. By the end of the month, she had more students than she could handle. They came from every species, who wanted to understand unpredictability, who were curious about human naval history, who found her thought processes strange and fascinating. Even a few younger, brave enough to admit that their ancient traditions might have room for new ideas. Became her first and most dedicated student. The massive warrior had swallowed his pride and committed himself to learning with the same intensity he had once brought to following the old ways. He was not naturally flexible. 4,000 years of culture resisted change at every turn, but he kept trying. The box, he said one evening, struggling with the concept had introduced him to. You say I must think outside it, but I do not understand. How can I know what is outside if I do not know where the walls are? Smiled. They were sitting in her small room, the stars visible through the window. Data screens glowed around them, showing diagrams and simulations. That is exactly the right question, she said. Before you can think outside the box, you must first see the box. You must understand your own assumptions, your own patterns, the things you believe without questioning. And once I see them, then you can choose, follow them or break them. The power comes from choice. Was quiet for a long moment, then slowly he nodded. My people have not made choices for a long time, he admitted. We have followed. The old ways work, so we use them. The ancient tactics win, so we trust them. We have forgotten that there was ever another option. That is what happens to civilizations that win too much, said gently. They stop growing. They stop changing. They become powerful but brittle. And one day something comes along that their ancient wisdom cannot handle. Something like humans. Perhaps. Commander had been reassigned to administrative duties. He no longer taught classes. Saw him sometimes in the hallways, his scales pale, his eyes empty. He did not speak to her and she did not approach him. There was nothing to say. She did not hate him. She understood him. He was a product of his culture just as she was a product of hers. The difference was that her culture had taught her to adapt. His had taught him to dominate. When domination failed, he had nothing left. Perhaps in time even he might learn, but that was not her responsibility. The final examinations came at the end of the semester. Every cadet faced a series of tests, tactical simulations, strategic analysis, leadership evaluations. The results would determine their rankings for the next year. Prepared carefully but not nervously, she had learned everything she could from the Academy's curriculum. More importantly, she had taught herself things the curriculum did not include: human military history, Earth's greatest strategic minds, the lessons of species that had been underestimated before. The week of testing was exhausting. She slept little, ate less, and pushed her mind harder than she ever had before. But when the results were announced, the exhaustion did not matter. Park ranked first. She was the top cadet in her class, the first human to ever achieve that honor in the history of the Unified Species Academy. The announcement came during a formal assembly in the main hall. Hundreds of cadets and officers watched as walked to the stage to receive her certificate. Admiral presented it to her personally, a rare honor that made the importance of the moment clear. "Cadet Park," said, her voice carrying through the hall, "you have demonstrated excellence in every area of military education. Tactical innovation, strategic flexibility, and most importantly, the ability to learn from those different from yourself while teaching them in return. On behalf of Earth and the Galactic Council, congratulations." The applause was genuine this time, not polite tolerance but real respect earned through action. After the ceremony, found herself surrounded by beings who wanted to shake her hand, touch her shoulder, express their admiration. It was overwhelming in a way victory in a simulation had not been. These were not enemies she had defeated. They were colleagues who had come to see her as an equal. She excused herself as soon as she could and found a quiet corner near a window. The stars stretched out before her, the same stars she had watched on her first night at the Academy. So much had changed since then. She had changed. A familiar presence appeared beside her, moving quietly for such a large creature. "You earned it," he said simply. "I know." They stood in silence for a while. Outside, a transport ship was arriving from somewhere distant, its lights blinking as it approached the docking ring. "I received my assignment today," said. "I will be serving on a patrol fleet near the outer territories. Real combat, not simulations." "Are you ready?" He considered the question seriously. "I do not know. 3 months ago I would have said yes without hesitation. Now I understand how much I do not know. Is that wisdom or weakness?" "Wisdom," said. "The moment you think you know everything is the moment you stop being able to learn." Made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You sound like an ancient philosopher." "I sound like my father." More silence, comfortable now, the silence of friends who did not need words to communicate. "What will you do?" asked, "after the Academy?" Had thought about this question many times. Earth wanted her back. The military leaders who had sent her here were eager to benefit from her experiences, her knowledge, her connections. She could return home a hero, climb the ranks, perhaps become an admiral like her father. But she had also received other offers. A position at the Academy itself, teaching the next generation of cadets. An invitation from the Galactic Council to serve as a human liaison. Even a strange message from a research collective interested in studying human creativity. "I do not know yet," she admitted. "There are many options." "Whatever you choose," said, "you have already changed things. Not just for humans, for everyone. The Academy will never be the same." He was right, she knew. Her victory over him had been the beginning. Her teaching had continued the change. Her ranking as top cadet had confirmed it. Humans were no longer children playing at the edge of civilization. They were part of the galaxy now, truly part of it. The ceremony concluded late in the evening and returned to her quarters for the last time. Tomorrow, she would pack her belongings and begin the journey back to Earth. She would see her father and brother again. She would walk under an open sky and breathe air that had not been recycled through alien machines. But first, she had one more thing to do. She had heard rumors that someone had commissioned something for her, a surprise. She was told to visit the Academy's Hall of Victories before she left. The hall was a long corridor lined with the symbols of civilizations that had produced exceptional officers. Ancient flags, some dating back thousands of years. Monuments to species that had shaped galactic history. Walked slowly through the hall looking at each display. The banners stained with the dust of conquered worlds. The hive symbols precise and identical. The glowing crests of the beautiful in their alien geometry. And at the end of the corridor, in a space that had been empty before, hung a new flag. Earth's flag, a blue marble on black background. Below it a plaque had been installed, gold letters on dark metal. It read, "They burned our flag, we built a legacy." Cadet Park, first human to achieve top ranking, Unified Species Academy. Stood before the flag for a long time. She thought about the ashes on its classroom floor. She thought about the flames that had consumed this same symbol months ago. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The flag had been destroyed, and now it hung in the Hall of Victories, honored among the greatest warriors the galaxy had ever produced. That was the human way. Fall and rise, burn and rebuild, lose and come back stronger. Reached out and touched the fabric gently. It was real, solid. A symbol, yes, but also a promise. A promise that humanity would never stop reaching, never stop growing, never stop proving that they belonged among the stars. "Thank you," she whispered. She was not sure who she was thanking. Her father who had taught her patience, her brother who had believed in her, Admiral who had supported her, who had become her friend, even whose hatred had forced her to become strong. All of them, none of them, the universe itself. She turned and walked away, leaving the flag to hang in its place of honor. Tomorrow she would go home. But part of her would always be here, in the halls of the academy, in the minds of the cadets she had taught, in the history she had helped create. The stars waited outside, cold and distant and full of possibility. Park walked toward them. She had proven that humanity deserved its place in the galaxy. Now it was time to see what came next.